Welcome to Building Better Communities with Bob Hart, the podcast that dives into the stories of the leaders in commercial real estate and beyond as they talk about their careers, the market, and what it takes to build better communities. On today's episode, Hessam Nadji, President and CEO of Marcus Millichap, joins Bob on the podcast. Now for your host, Bob Hart.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Building Better Communities with Bob Hart. I am Bob Hart, and I'm very pleased today to have my good friend, longtime business associate, and great member of the real estate community here with me today, Hessam Nadji. Hessam is the president and chief executive officer and is a director of the public company Marcus Millichap. He's held that job since March of 2016. That's a pretty good tenure for anybody in a public company, I'd say. Before that, he was with Marcus Millichap for a period of, since all the way back to 1996.
That's right.
Heading up research and eventually executive roles, founded IPA, and then became the CEO of Marcus Millichap. A very, very long tenure. And I think you served for about 10 years before that with Hal Ellis at Grubb & Ellis.
That's right.
Starting all the way back to 1986.
That's exactly right, Bob.
So that's almost 4 decades. Can you believe that?
I can.
And it's gone by, I think, you've really emerged from over a decade ago of being not so much behind the scenes, but in a more behind the scenes role to running a company and now really being a spokesperson for an entire industry, because you're very well known through a lot of the media that you've been on, CNBC, Fox, Wall Street Week, you name it. Tell us a little bit about the evolution of your career. And, you know, you started with very humble beginnings, and
right.
You were very patient over that period of time, obviously.
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your podcast, Bob. Always a pleasure to be with you and have conversations about the business and what it takes to succeed in our industry. It's an honor to be part of your dialogue with some very interesting people that you've had on previous podcasts. But the answer to your question is accidentally. I ended up sitting here with you on this great day in Southern California, literally by accident. I was a student in the mid-'80s in Seattle, Washington, where Microsoft was all the rage and technology was all the rage. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to have a professional career. And
did you major in computer science?
And I majored in computer science, really because of a lack of other specific fields to pursue, just knowing that I wanted to have a meaningful career and be able to reverse the misfortunes that my family had experienced because of the revolution in Iran. So education was really important, and finding a way to become relevant in the changing economy in the mid-'80s was really important, and technology was the way to do that.
Were you a teenager at that time, at the time of the revolution?
At the time of the revolution, I was 13. My family left Iran coincidentally right before the revolution started. My parents always wanted to move to America, my father in particular. Have an aunt who was his sponsor as his sister, who lived in Michigan, and they made arrangements for us to come to America and apply for our citizenship when the relationship between Iran and the United States was still incredible. We had no notion of a major problem.
But they followed the law, they followed the procedures, and they did so with patience and determination.
Absolutely. My dad was very much by the book. He had a photography business in Tehran, which was actually quite well known. I still run into lots of Persian
I remember we ran into none other than Alex Marabi, who said,
"Yeah,
oh my God, that's the place I took my family photo."
Alex is a great example of somebody who lived in Iran a long time ago, who took pictures, family pictures, portraits at my dad's studio, and I've run into Iranians all over the world that remember Nadji Studios, which is my dad and uncle's business.
So let me ask you this. You're very, very family oriented. I know that because we're friends. Do you think the roots back to that family photography business was a part of your ethos and learning and the way your dad got to know people?
Absolutely, no question about it. I was surrounded by a very large family on both sides, my mom's side and my dad's side, aunts, uncles, It was a very busy time. 60s and 70s for Tehran were the best of times.
Yes.
Because there was so much progress, so many foreigners. You got exposed to different cultures.
And society was much more progressive.
It was.
And open.
It was becoming very westernized pretty fast. Maybe a little bit too fast, which turned out to be the case. But my family was a middle class. My dad had a photography studio with his brothers. My mom was an English teacher in the Royal Iranian Navy.
Wow.
She would actually, her and her teachers would train officers that were coming to the United States or England for training on, basically.
Which is really a time that the United States and Iran were allies.
Very, very close allies. And so it was the glory days. So I got exposed to a lot of all this activity, which was great. And of course, the family name, my dad had a phenomenal reputation. My uncles had a phenomenal reputation. My grandfather was a general in the army, very, very honorable man. Somebody that was actually arrested after the revolution, investigated, and then freed with his full pension, because under his leadership, no scandals had occurred, no wrongful deaths or hanging of political opposition members had occurred, or any bribery or fraud, which was somewhat common at the time.
Your uncle, did you say?
My grandfather.
Your grandfather?
Yeah.
Wow.
So there was a lot of honor and reputation as a highlight of how you conduct yourself in my upbringing. Middle class family, came to the States really because of a long-term dream my father had to live in America, like so many people around the world. And then of course he had sold his business and he had a piece of land and liquidated all of it, left all the capital in Iran, not thinking anything like a revolution would be happening.
Right, who could have predicted
over
that?
the years that devalued, down to nothing. After we got here, our visa application, our citizenship application went on hold because of the hostage crisis.
Which
And
was in 1970, 80 it occurred, right?
It was 1980. My father wouldn't work illegally like a lot of other people. He was very much by the book.
Wow.
So they ran out of money and had to go back to Iran. I had to stay back, and by that time I'd moved from Michigan to Seattle.
And that was a time of political transition, was it not?
In Iran.
In Iran,
Well,
yeah.
it's post-revolution. The
Yeah.
revolution happened
Yeah.
in 1979. So it was very chaotic, and they unfortunately had to leave, and like millions of other people, I had to make my way as a young American.
So you were more or less by yourself.
I was.
And you were living in Michigan then?
I'd moved to Seattle by
You
then.
had
My
moved to
family
Seattle.
had moved to Seattle, yeah.
And you were college age then?
Yeah, just coming out of high school, actually, and went to Bellevue Community College for a couple of years. Got odd
Did you
jobs.
study English in Iran or here?
I did study English a little bit in Iran, but most of the foundation for me was developed in England. I lived in England for about 9 months prior to trying to migrate to the U.S. We tried to migrate to England, where my mom had been sent to study in the late 50s, early 60s, which was unheard of for a girl, a Persian girl.
Yeah.
And so she really wanted to get back to England. That didn't work out. Their immigration laws were even more strict. But so I learned some English there. But when I arrived in 1978 as a 13-year-old, I didn't speak fluent English at all. So I was fortunate enough to have basically a step cousin that took me under his wing. He was 15, I was 13, we became best buddies. And so I learned a lot of my English very quickly by hanging out with him and his friends, and he was good enough to welcome me into his little circle of friends.
How did it work for you as a Persian immigrant in a neighborhood high school, say in Seattle, where maybe there wasn't as many members of your community
Sure.
as it would be, say, today?
Yes.
How did that work?
I was really fortunate, both in Lansing, Michigan, where I was
Yeah.
initially when the revolution started, and I was going to junior high and then high school, and then Bellevue, Washington. People were curious, people were supportive. I was not discriminated against. That may have to do something with my attitude about it. I
Yeah.
really wanted to acclimate. I wanted to be American. I wanted to lose the accent and fit in. I wanted to figure out how America worked and become a part of it. So I made a real point to acclimate.
So you really adopted this country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank God for this country, because what I've been able to accomplish wouldn't be possible anywhere else. I'm a big believer in that, and I'm a huge patriot. I'll take a bullet for America any day.
I know you would. And, we're struggling today, obviously, with the whole issue of immigration
Yeah.
because of the fractured border we have. And it's polarized a lot of people. And yet, what's built this country has been immigrants.
No question
And
about
the
it.
best and the brightest that have stayed here and, have worked hard and helped build the country. So,
Right.
Which-
As a legal immigrant who absolutely followed the law and respected the law, I'm a big advocate for legal immigration. There has to be a system. There has to be checks and balances. But we need to remain the beacon of hope for so many people around the world. That's what makes America so amazing. But it can't be unmanaged. It has to be managed.
has to be managed.
Yeah.
And that was very evident during our visit to Capitol Hill last week.
Last week, yeah.
Hearing from a number of senators and
Right.
how basically the border is being overrun and they can't process people.
Right. That's harmful. That is not productive.
Now, it's sad because probably the majority of them are people that want to be here for the right reason.
Exactly.
So hopefully we can figure it out soon.
Yes. So going back to
Yeah.
your question about what was happening around the time of post-revolution, coming out of high school, family left, and I was just basically trying to figure out, all right, what's next? That's when I kind of discovered technology and decided to specialize instead of just doing general studies.
What did you major in? Computer science?
Computer science. And
At
that came
City College
from,
of Seattle, is it?
City University.
City University.
In Seattle, which was really a vocational school. It was a night school. There was no online back then. I couldn't afford to go to University of Washington or other
So you
major
worked
schools
and went to school.
because I had to work full time. So it was whoever had a night school program. But before that, I happened to be driving one day down Northeast 8th in Bellevue, the main drag through the city. There's a billboard about some college that would give you your associate's arts degree in 9 months in computer science, Griffin College. And I just pulled into the parking lot and to learn about it because I was looking for direction.
Yeah.
And I signed up for that program, and it was really pivotal because it was like fish to water. I loved computer programming. I loved the decision-making process, decision-making nuances that essentially drive computer programming, and did really well at it. And it just became kind of a mental frame from that point on problem solving and opportunity pursuit. Because when you're trying to get to an end result and you're writing code, there's so many paths to get there.
That was in the days of Fortran.
It was COBOL, COBOL and Fortran,
COBOL and Fortran.
and BASIC, and later a little bit of Unix. But yeah, it was in the early days, where you
It was
still
more about
had
mainframes than it was
it
personal
was.
computers.
I trained on an IBM System 36. And it was the green and white papers that you had to load up to the
I remember
matrix,
that.
dot matrix.
Those little
printer. Yeah.
dots on the ends.
I'm
you had to
dating
line
myself.
up.
I mean, this to a lot of your young listeners, this is probably the equivalent of the 1700s before.
Now they don't even use paper.
Yeah, exactly. So it was really an amazing path that kind of happened accidentally, and it worked for me. It kind of matched my wiring, and I did well at it.
Talk about your first job coming out of college. Was that Grubb & Ellis, or was there something you did before
I had
that?
other odd jobs and restaurant jobs, and I actually was fortunate enough to be hired by a store owner that did bed and bath, kind of goods, and I sold comforters and towels, and actually thrived at that. Good customer relations, and was able to increase sales and get promoted to assistant manager. It was a big deal.
Wow. What was that, in Bellevue?
I was doing that actually, in Renton and
In Renton, okay.
Everett. They had 2 stores.
Yeah.
And I was doing that while I was going to school at this vocational school. And Grubb & Ellis happened to be a name on a piece of paper that our college placement office had posted, looking for a systems operator. I had no idea what that was, or who Grubb & Ellis was, or what commercial real estate was.
So you came in through that channel,
Yeah.
not the real estate channel per se.
Exactly. I went down to downtown Seattle, this gorgeous office space overlooking the Puget Sound. This wonderful, very friendly lady came over, interviewed me, and opened the door to this office filled with compact personal computers with the double floppy drives and a TI mini computer. And she said, our corporate headquarters just shipped us all these computers. We don't know what to do with them.
Oh my God.
And I thought, this is the job for me. I can figure this out. And
Interesting.
so I took the job at $1,000 a month, essentially as a data entry clerk, for the most part.
Oh, interesting.
That was the beginning for me.
So you were adept at integrating the computers and getting them to work for people as literally an early PC in a way.
In a way, it was mostly office tenant surveys. Interns would go to the lobbies, write down the directories in the buildings. Then we'd come and look it up on the microfiche and look at the SIC code and try to figure out which tenant is where. And then we would have these data entry forms with the company name, square footage, if you can get it, and lease expiration date. That was the holy grail, lease expiration date. So as I processed all this data for, the first 6-9 months, I started to get curious about, well, what does this mean? And what is this expiration date? What's the significance?
Yeah.
Well, of course, that's such an important metric for tenant rep
Well,
brokers.
that's what drives the next step.
So I started to look at the demand, expirations, future demand, contrasted it to available contiguous space for larger leases in downtown Seattle. It turned out there were very few contiguous large blocks of space. Presented this at a Monday morning sales meeting with transparencies. This is way before PowerPoint, and showed the demand side coming up in the next 2 years. Showed the current supply side, which was dwindling, and I didn't know if it meant anything. Just trying to put two and two together, and the response was silence. You would think somebody had parted the ocean or something, because there was a shortage of space.
Well, 35 years ago, there were no huge office towers in Seattle. There were probably a few, but
There were a few, but the use of information was so limited. Anyway, the long and short of it is they dressed me up and took me on roadshows, which I had no idea what a roadshow was.
Yeah.
We went around and met with a bunch of tenants and signed up a number of tenant rep agreements from that study, and that catapulted the notion of data going into a bunch of computers into some relevant, useful way of helping decision makers. And that really my career took off from there.
and was that the precursor to you getting involved with research at Grubb & Ellis?
Yeah, because I was really I was a data entry clerk, and as I started to try to analyze what the data meant and put reports together, it migrated to research. And I was really very fortunate in that Hal Ellis himself, who would tour, would come around the offices and visit, and somehow I was introduced to him, showed him some of my work. On another visit when he came to town, the broker that was assigned to take him on a tour called in sick or something, and the manager called me and said, let's go, we need to tour Mr. Ellis. So we went around, driving around Seattle, and thank goodness I knew all the buildings. And I made an impression on Hal based on my just sort of...
He was an iconic figure. I never met him, but...
No, he was an incredible visionary that was too optimistic and not realistic about market cycles and expense reductions. That's why Grubb & Ellis, sadly, a few years later, went under.
Did they go under, or wasn't Prudential involved with them as well?
Prudential was, and they converted the debt they had on the company to equity, and they installed the CEO, and then there was a revolving door of 4 or 5 CEOs. And I survived all that.
I think I worked for one of them.
Is that right?
Yeah, briefly. Yeah.
I won't ask you which
No.
one. But Hal was ousted out of the company, and I learned a lot having the front row seat, working very closely with him, and our chief administrative officer at the time was a great mentor, Gordon Hess. And meeting Bill Millichap first, and then George Marcus, who were incredibly connected to the business.
Let's back up. Was one of them at Grubb & Ellis then?
George had actually brokered for Grubb & Ellis
That's
in
what
the
I thought.
late 60s.
That's what I thought.
But we didn't
yeah.
meet there. Our timelines were very
Right.
different. George had founded Marcus Millichap in '71, and we're now into the early '90s when Grubb & Ellis was really falling apart. I was still
Yeah.
there. And Bill Millichap had seen some of my reports, and the brokers at Marcus Millichap had pointed to the Grubb & Ellis reports that I was producing as the head of research.
Interesting.
And,
M&M probably didn't have research back then.
Not yet.
Not at
because
that-
it was a
yeah.
regional firm at the time.
Right. It was California.
And hadn't really expanded yet. So Bill called me up, cold called me, and wanted to meet. And of course, you take a meeting with Bill Millichap, highly respected in the industry.
Well known.
We got to know each other over several months, and I gave him a vision of what could happen. In that process, I got to meet George, And the two of them, the amazing thing about this company and the difference with so many other companies, including my former company, Grove Analysis, is that the founders were really tied to the business. They were realistic, they were oriented toward the customer first and their own salespeople second, and they cared. And they were not willing to grow for the sake of growth, take on debt, do crazy things. It was all a business plan, market sizing, what's the strategy. That's how George has really engineered a very thoughtful process for all his businesses, not just our brokerage business, that we continue on today in being really mindful of growth versus risk and really sticking to what you do well.
If you look at the evolution of the George Marcus and Millichap companies, particularly in George's case, he evolved from, call it, real estate broker, investment broker, into an owner.
Absolutely.
And that was a big transformation.
And a startup genius in the way he
Yes.
created companies. They happen to be in real estate, but he was really good at creating the framework of a business plan, execution plan, capital versus
And you know,
ROI.
all those companies exist today.
They do. In fact, they continue to do very, very well.
Yeah, I think there was, once when I was working very closely with George's company, when I was at Kennedy Wilson, we used to invest for his account through Hanover.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I used to think about a statement that I think I had heard, that for every multifamily transaction that goes down in California, there was about 1 in 7 ways George Marcus could make money off of it.
Well, he did.
Whether it be Essex or Pacific or Marcus Millichap or Capital Markets or Hanover, or in some cases through my entity at Kennedy Wilson.
He had a very integrated plan.
He really did.
Executed
Really
very well.
does.
Supply constrained markets, really well-defined points of discipline, not to get into markets that had more volatility or supply issues.
Yeah.
And it worked.
Yeah, he was stuck to his knitting.
Yeah, very much so.
So back to your career. So I guess in 1996, you flipped the switch.
Yes, that's when I joined Marcus Millichap.
And Grubb & Ellis was kind of in a wind-down mode probably by then.
Yes,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
And Hal had been gone for 4 years, and he
Right.
started his own investment firm, and we stayed friends. In fact, George invited Hal to be an advisor for Marcus Millichap.
Oh, interesting.
Hal, for many years, for probably around 8 or 9 years before his passing, was an active advisor on our advisory board. And he added a lot of value. It was really fun to have him.
Interesting.
Right.
So when you started out at Marcus, it was more, again, in the research area.
I
Really
came.
building that capability, I imagine.
I came for a very simple reason. I told Bill, and separately George, that research was an alternate reason for our sales force to stay in touch with clients, to add value, and to draw clients to the firm in between transactions, whether it was a refi or a sale, while you're holding an asset. You may not be in the market to transact, but you always need information. That's what I'd proven at Grubb & Ellis as a proof of concept, and I wanted to bring it to Marcus Millichap. The idea was to bring a Wall Street type of framework, which I'd experienced with at Grubb & Ellis, to the private client world that Marcus Millichap dominated, and to really kind of forge new ground in using practical research, bringing practical research to microcap, middle market, and institutional clients in a way that was usable. And they really liked the vision. They supported me along the way, but it was literally a startup. I joined, there was nothing in place. I was the first hire. And I started to hire some research professionals and grow it really from the ground up.
Was it relatively easy to get the brokers to embrace that and support that?
It was, because they were hungry for it.
Yeah.
In fact, George had retained McKinsey & Company to do a study.
Wow. Okay.
Interviewing clients, interviewing our own brokers, interviewing some competitors even. They came back with a growth plan for the company, which basically said, you've got a very unique model, take it national organically, because there's really no one you can buy or acquire, given the unique culture of this company and our unique way of marketing real estate. And the second recommendation was, you have to have research and advisory services to stay in tune with the clients.
And to have an institutional. But Marcus Millichap really, when it began as a brokerage firm, was really focused on the, I'm going to call it the middle market entrepreneurial investor.
Still is. That's
Which
our
is at its
foundation.
core.
Yep.
Which is at its core. And then in I don't know what it was, 2010, I think I'm going to credit you with this brainchild of deciding it was time to compete more directly with the institutional brokerage firms and really cast a new label around a portion of Marcus Millichap as IPA.
That's exactly right. There are others at the time, other managing directors at the time, who really recognized the need for this, as well as
But I think you
myself.
coalesced it.
But I coalesced it because some of those folks retired out or left the company. And the reason it worked for me, Bob, has to do with the way you and I started to work together as associates, and you being a very important client of our company, in that I was going to NMHC, I was going to ULI, I was providing the market overviews, I was getting a lot of interaction with CIOs and CEOs and folks like yourself and your colleagues, and they would always take my call because we had something of value to offer through research. It wasn't a sales call. It was an advisory research call. And through that, I developed so many industry relationships in the multifamily sector to begin with, that it made it a natural fit for me to then say to the company, let's actually build a sales force around an institutional practice. Let's regroup in the institutional arena, which is very different than the private client arena. Clients want a managed account model. They want more sophisticated modeling. They want very easy touch points, and you have to have very senior level brokers that understand the institutional business. We started out with just a handful of those. You know who they are.
Yes.
The Stan Joneses and Greg Harrises and the Peter Katz. And,
Sure.
And we basically said to ourselves, let's form this in a very unique fashion as a hybrid model, not getting away from our private client business, embracing our private client business, but separately building an institutional oriented model and be the most unique company in America that does both.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that. What's, I think, very unique about the Marcus Millichap organic approach to IPA was that you were still able to maintain your Marcus and Millichap Main Street identity.
Absolutely.
While initiating and establishing this Wall Street identity.
That was the plan.
I think you did it too without creating animosity within the firm.
Well, there's always friction because the private client brokers believe they can do a $100 million deal.
Sure.
And the sensitivity on the institutional side is that, well, wait a minute, this is...
But it also created aspirational career growth.
No question. We have been able to create a hybrid platform with some friction, but nonetheless create it and then grow it by hiring outside teams, growing IPA both organically and through acquisitions, and becoming a leading institutional broker in the multifamily arena. Retail is still being built, office and industrial a little bit further behind that, but the concept has really proven to work.
So, I want to trace back. So, you really spent from '96 to about, 2013 maybe, in the research area, would you say, of Marcus Millichap? And then you got more involved with corporate development, it sounds like.
Before 2013, which was our IPO, I did start to take on some sales responsibilities.
Got it.
Overseeing the specialty divisions, starting IPA and going on pitches. Part of the privilege I've had as
But you were a bit of an anomaly, though. You weren't part of that DNA.
I'm not supposed to be here, Bob.
You weren't part of that DNA. Because if I think back to all the folks like Harvey and so forth that ran the brokerage side, they all come from brokerage.
Correct. And that was controversial
Yeah.
in Bill and George tapping me to run the company without a direct brokerage background. But what they came to realize is that from the day I did that initial tenant survey in Seattle, I've been on the road in front of clients. I've been watching brokers present and lose, present and win, and then be able to coach them and create tools around how do you do a better job for the client. So I've been consultative selling my entire career without really calling it that.
You've even made the journalists at CNBC better now. They can say your name right, and
most of the time. Not
and
always.
I think they understand what multifamily is. So
well, slowly but surely.
You've really inculcated not just Marcus and Millichap and your clients, but really broader America through your platform. So it's been amazing to watch.
Thank you for recognizing that. And the reason I think that's worked and they have me on frequently, which is a privilege, is that I make a point not to go on there and pound our chest or talk
Right.
about us.
This
isn't just about us, it's about the entire industry. It's about investing.
Really been very statesmanlike, and I applaud that. And frankly, if more people in the industry did that, it would be better.
Thank you, Bob. Most
So I
kind.
appreciate that. As I mentioned before, and I think a lot of the viewers know that you've been a frequent guest on MSNBC and CNBC, Fox, CNN. A lot of preparation must go into that. How do you do that? How do you fit that into your ability to run the company and do that? And oftentimes you host your own. I've been on a couple of them.
Right.
There's a lot of preparation that goes to these webinars and things that you do. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Ironically, there's
Because they seem flawless.
Well, thank you, Bob. Ironically, there's much more preparation in the ones we host, where we have guests like yourself, or Ben Bernanke, or Hank Paulson, or Larry Summers, which are some of our guests.
Bernanke was very
animated,
precise.
and precise. Yeah. What happens when you throw $5 trillion on the U.S. economy? You get inflation. Basically, what's one of his quotes.
Yeah.
And because you really have to make sure that the content is there, that it's all coordinated. When you're on live television, you have no idea what they're going to ask. There's a little bit of a framework before these sessions with say, CNBC or Bloomberg or Fox, but they pivot based on the breaking news of the moment.
Right.
There have been times when I was in the green room thinking that I'm going to go talk about housing, and in fact, this is a real story, on Fox, the producer comes in and says, Toys R Us just put out a press release, they're closing 600 stores, we're switching topics, you're talking about that.
I think was that recently? I saw you talking about retail about not too long ago.
The Toys R Us story was a couple of years ago when they announced their bankruptcy, so that's not recent. But the point being that you can't really prepare. That's why it's a permanent part of the job for me has always been to stay on top of what's happening with the economy, what's happening with the equities markets, and of course all product types within.
Well, you're talking about multiple sectors that are all unique,
Right.
whether it be retail, office, multi-industrial,
Correct.
hotels.
Right. So you have just to be up on it. We have a great research department. We invest heavily in our research. As you know, we create our own content, and we have access to every subscription known to the entire industry. So I have the benefit of them providing me frequent updates on what's happening, and we have a kind of a real-time ability to update information, so I can make sure I'm educated before I go on live television.
The company's done an amazing job growing under your leadership. I think you're up to, what, 80 offices or more now?
We have 80 offices throughout North America. Our Canadian operation has come a long way in the last 5 years. We pivoted on the way we recruited and positioned ourselves in Canada. And the most rewarding part of it is seeing existing brokers with the company now really step up to a much higher level of production and client mind share and market share. And we've added so much external talent. We've added more external talent in the last 5 years through acquisitions and recruiting than we had the prior 45 years because of a pivot in the strategy.
And the brand development.
And the brand development. And being a public company really helps that. People can look you up, and there's more visibility, more transparency, and we believe in that in a big way.
And you guys are known for your training program too on the residential side. That's a very famous training program where a lot of
it's across the board. I mean, our training program
it's across all
applies
sectors.
to our retail brokers,
Oh,
to our office brokers, industrial brokers, and our multifamily brokers, all the same. And so it's really much more of a sales training and client connectivity training than it is, of course, the underwriting and the financial analysis part of each product type and the nuances of each product type is a big part of the training as well. But the Marcus and Millichap way of doing brokerage, where there is a market focus, a product type focus, a client outreach, business development, local knowledge, and really metrics that people are held accountable to is what sets us apart. When we bring in brokers from other firms, they're blown away by the culture, by the internal collaboration, and by the ground level sort of market focus in terms of business development calls, client meetings, proposals, number of listings. We track every metric there is to know. I can tell you right now, who has the highest or lowest list to close conversion ratio by pulling 3 simple reports. So we're constantly monitoring the productivity and effectiveness of our people and pivoting.
What I've noticed, and obviously I'm biased, I think a lot of you and your firm, but what I have noticed in comparing Marcus Millichap to some of the big brokerage firms like CBRE and JLL is the brokers that come from Marcus Millichap seem to have a grittier, street-oriented sense of knowledge of their local businesses.
That's the essence of the company, because the private client almost requires you to have the boots on the ground and the deal flow and the aggressive market coverage. But the institutional client base, really in the last 10 years, you were talking about the foundation of IPA, requires that sophistication and more advanced analytics. So we're trying to blend, we've been trying to, and continue to try to blend the two together in an overall elevation of our professionalism, whether it's to the private client, whether it's to the institutional client. And I have to say, I mean, when I'm looking at the history of True America, the history of BCE, and the companies that you're involved with, the deal flow that we set out to bring to VIP clients, such as your companies, is a big part of our accountability and responsibility. Because if we can help you create value as a client, then you're likely to do business with us over the long term. That's how we've aligned ourselves with the companies you've been involved with and countless other investors, whether they're small, families, partnerships, individuals, or other institutional clients. The driver is, what are we doing to add value for the client and then earn the business over the long term?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's the value that can be created through whatever initiative that you're taking, but that long-term approach.
Absolutely. And in a transactional industry, in a transactional mindset, you eat what you kill, it's very challenging to always instill that. But I think we've done a really good job at it. That's why we have brokers that have been with us for 40 years, 30 years, 20 years, and 10 plus years.
You reward them well. You've had some iconic trips. I get to hear about the
Our
the
awards
aftermath of
trips
those.
are a big part of the culture. That's true.
Let's go back to the two founders, to George and Bill.
Yeah.
And I know you were very close to Bill Millichap.
I was.
And you have a healthy respect for George.
Of course, I'm also just tremendously fortunate to work closely with George since I became CEO. The relationship obviously went to a whole other level, as he being my chairman and me being promoted to CEO. That was the introduction of my more direct interaction with George, which has been fantastic.
That took a lot of trust on his part.
It did, and frankly, that's one of the key reasons that I tell the story every chance that I get. In that, if you earn your position over the long term with someone as iconic as a George Marcus, the rewards are in the trust that you're then receiving. On
George can also be pretty critical at times.
George is a
you have to be able to withstand that.
Very
Most people couldn't withstand
high expectation founder.
Yeah.
He is has the mindset of a founder and an innovator to this day, and so you really have to know your your facts. Facts are incredibly important, and have a plan for what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
George does not react well to fantasy plans or hope as a strategy. You really have to be data-driven and specific in terms of what you want to accomplish. That's why I've worked well with him, because I'm also wired that way.
Right.
And I've always looked to
prepared.
quantify the value. Show me the money. Show me the numbers. And my team knows everything we do requires looking at the facts first.
As I tell my colleagues when we're preparing for a pitch of our own, I said there's no substitute for good preparation.
So
There just
true.
isn't.
So true.
You can't just wing it.
Right.
So what's the best piece of advice, if you were sharing it with younger viewers, people starting, what's the piece, there must be many good pieces of advice you've had over the years in your career, but what would you say to them?
First of all, I can't think of an industry that has as much open-ended opportunity in a variety of ways as real estate. Whether on the principal side, whether it's on the development side, whether it's on the brokerage side, or capital markets financing side. I can't think of another industry that has so much open-ended potential for somebody who wants to work hard engage themselves, learn from others, and pursue their dreams. That's, to me, that's the first observation.
No limits.
No limits.
Yeah.
The second is to really decide which part of the industry and which part of the rock you want to be a part of. And the third piece is, how do you become the best at that? How do you become irreplaceable? How do you become a standout provider? And don't just do a job. Don't just be average. Bend over backwards to be exceptional. That formula cannot fail. It cannot fail.
There's also something to be said, at least in the folks that I've dealt with over the years of your firm. The most successful ones are very long tenured at the firm. They haven't jumped from firm to firm. That's a challenge, I think, in today's environment, to keep people on board and interested.
It is. It
for
really
long
is.
periods of time.
Industry has become much more transactional.
Yes.
We're fortunate to have the strong culture that keeps people here a long time, but we've lost some brokers to other
Sure.
firms because of money and on a transactional basis. That works in some cases. A lot of times it's a short-term little boost and it fizzles out. I've always said to anybody considering their options is think over the long term, almost like a net proceeds, right? What are the net proceeds of a long-term equation for a long-term career? Can you get a cash pop or something for the next couple of years, chase the next shiny object, or are you building a long-term career in a book of business where your clients want to see stability in the way you service them? Or do you want to just jump around and cash a check every 5-6 years? So there is the mercenaries, and that's become more common. It's a reality of the business.
I think you've continued to build your enterprise through organic growth and natural growth rather than trying to pay for growth, shall we say.
Well, it's become much more of a combined strategy where we have acquired talent and we have brought in a lot of outside talent, more so, as I mentioned earlier, than any time in the history of the company.
I know you've tried to do that in the capital markets business.
For sure. Our current Marcus Millichap Capital Corporation, IPA Capital Markets, is unrecognizable compared to where we were 5 years ago. We have a lot of tenured originators that help us start in the finance part that are still here, and they're doing a fantastic job. But we've supplemented them with a lot of outside talent that didn't overlap. This is really important. Our acquisition and expansion strategy is designed to be complementary and expand the company into product types or niches or markets where we have no coverage, instead of putting people on top of each other and creating internal conflict. Really sensitive to that. That's why it's worked so well.
Yes.
And the outside folks are more welcomed and collaborative, and they give each other referrals and so on, because we don't pile them on top of each other and create a lot of conflict. That's a huge part of the strategy.
Well, you're certainly building a better community by doing that.
But
let's talk about something I know that's very important to you from a, just your whole life and the ethos you have is you have a very close family. You've invested a lot in your family. I've witnessed it firsthand. You have great children. You have a great wife. You have a great extended family. How do you find time within everything you do to go to sports games, to visit your children when they're off in faraway places? How have you been able to manage that balance?
Well, thank you for asking the question, and it has been a huge part of the reward of this whole journey, is that I do have a very close family. It started with them understanding what I was all about. And if I was gone, I made a point, and hope my wife always, who always also came from nothing. I mean, that's the other thing. We had that in common. We both came from nothing and had to create something from scratch. Having that in common, she was in the industry for a long time, as you know. She ended up being the head of research for Reef Deutsche Bank for many years. So having that in common was actually fun. And we always projected this notion of you have to work hard in order to have the privileges of a secure, more comfortable life than we experienced. Our kids knew that from day one. They suffered a lot in the early years because both of us were gone a lot. In the later years, I was gone a lot. There was a big price that was paid, but always with the understanding of the necessity to really develop the business and succeed at work in order to support the family. And Hope and I also support our extended family, parents, other extended family that we've helped over the years, because these people were instrumental in helping along the way years and years ago, especially for me on my childhood years, an uncle here, an aunt there, and so on, who were really supportive when I was a kid and went through some of the turmoil that I went through. And you got to pay it back to the degree that you can. I have a wonderful sister. She has her own family, very close with her as well. But my family loves the company. My family is Marcus Millichap. My family feels like the company is part of the family.
You answered my question before I asked it.
So that just makes it a lot more fluid, where they know a lot of my colleagues, they know a lot of my friends like you and Cynthia and Mia, who are clients, tough clients. At
We
times,
can be demanding.
we don't get all the listings that we would like to get from True America or BCE. We lose from time to time, which those are the calls that I get.
But you're pretty good. I've been beat up much worse. So,
So the point being that it really is a family affair, and I have to say, Bob, Bill and George created that within M&M from the start. There was always spouse and significant other activities from day one. When the company
I've
had
met
3
many of the
offices.
spouses of the brokers at your firm, and they're all highly connected and
Big
wired to what
Big time.
their spouses are doing career-wise. Hessam, we're in an interesting inflection point in the business right now, and the last couple years have been quite a comeuppance for all of us, either on the brokerage or the principal or the lending side. And now we're seeing this bit of a breakthrough. It's not fully emerged, and we're starting to be hopeful that interest rates will start to normalize even a bit more than they've begun to. Sure. Let's talk about the economy and what you think could be happening here from the perspective of the people who are running the money supply of this country.
Well, everything you said is 100% accurate and consistent with the way I see things. I think the economy is slowing the way it should. However, I don't think it's setting up to fall off a cliff, which is exactly what the Fed had tried to engineer over the last 2 years. And unfortunately, in order to get there, they had to take out a sledgehammer, which totally broke the valuation of real estate, especially multifamily, given how thin the cap rates were going into this. And that all came from waiting way too long to start the tightening process. So we've now paid the price. It's been 2 years. But what I'm seeing is that besides the economic strength, we're now experiencing enough price adjustments to look at replacement cost and current valuation versus peak for multifamily assets all over the country. And that itself is bringing in capital back to the marketplace. We're seeing the tours increase, we're seeing the multi-offers increase, we're seeing pricing go up during the bidding process for the first time in about 2 years.
Well, I think there's a greater value proposition in the sense that people are buying, I know we are, newer vintage, better quality assets.
Correct.
At a lower price per pound in comparison to what you could build them for.
Right. And that's happening at a time when tenant retention is way above average. The renewals are way above average. The renewal rates, rental rates, are aggressive because people are staying put longer. Construction starts are pulling way back after a record year in 2024. And the combination of those, plus a stable economy in a lowering interest rate environment, bode really well for 25 and 26.
Yeah. There's very much an emerging, and it continues to be a big issue politically, is the housing crisis in America. And I know Kamala Harris recently went out on a limb and said she's going to figure out a way to build 4 million homes for this country. We all know that that's going to be very challenging in the real world of finance, in the real world of entitlements and so forth. But what's your view on the housing situation and how we start to dig out of it and get some supply without regulation?
Well, I agree that the shortage is acute. The estimates are somewhere between 3 to 5 million units a year of scarcity of supply. We all know and advocate constantly education that shows that rent control does not solve the problem. It makes the problem worse. As you and I saw on Capitol Hill last week, individually, lawmakers get that, but collectively, they don't.
They don't.
And therefore, we still have an uphill battle on fighting illogical legislature from acting in a way that's going to make the problem significantly worse. So that's our first challenge. The real solution, in my opinion, is a public-private focused solution to create incentives for the private sector to want to develop more affordable units, to have an easier time with entitlement. And well, you know this more than I do, the process and the number of years and the cost that you have to go through. Something like 30 to 40% of cost is related to regulatory approvals.
Yeah, and you also have completion guarantees and so many other hurdles that, it has to be capitalized in the structure of the deal.
Right.
That someone has to do. So the business is, it's not for the faint of heart, let's say. And the more hurdles you put up, the harder and harder
Exactly.
it becomes.
Instead of removing those hurdles and instead of working together, this notion of, the private sector is the bad guy here is a misnomer. And, doing everything I can, I know you're doing everything you can to get that message to lawmakers. And NMHC does a phenomenal job.
They really do.
They really have worked hard on this educational campaign, and that prevented some really bad laws from passing. But we have an uphill battle. I do think from a supply-demand perspective, single-family homes are so out of reach for so many people. That's why the renewal rates are higher, renewal ratios are higher, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I don't see a big reason why home prices would come down. Therefore, apartment demand should stay pretty strong.
I think it's a good time to be an investor, whether you're a buyer or a seller.
Yes. And as a broker, we can help both buyers, sellers, and borrowers. So just let us know how we can help.
Perfect. Hessam, it's been unbelievable talking. It's amazing to have watched and understood your start as an immigrant to this country in very humble beginnings, working through a long period of a career, building your family, and really weaving that into the executive you become today, running a public company. So it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Bob. I will say that not a whole lot unlike your story. You may not have been an immigrant to this country, but
Immigrant to California.
your story is astonishing in terms of the distance you've come from your beginnings and the way that you've created these amazing platforms with amazing people and the cultures that you've created that I've seen firsthand, and also your commitment to philanthropy.
Thank you.
That is not lost on myself and many other people at Marcus Millichap IPA who know you well and have known you as long as I have, or longer in some instances.
Well, thank you. It's all part of building a better community.
It really is.
Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
You bet.